So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar, which is a side event to the Statistical Commission, the United Nations Statistical Commission session of 2025. Just a few words of housekeeping. I would like to ask everybody to please mute their microphones. Feel free to put your comments and questions on the chat. So, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar side event of the United Nations Statistical Commission session 2025. Just a few words of housekeeping. This event is being recorded, and please keep your microphones muted while you are not presenting or speaking, and feel free to add questions on the chat. This event on solving data disaggregation for SDG localization and beyond is hosted by the expert group on the integration of statistical and geospatial information. And I will hand over now for an introduction to Ms. Olive Powell, Office for National Statistics of the United Kingdom, who is co-chair of the EGISGI. The floor is yours, Olive.
Thank you, Luis. And welcome everyone for our amazing webinar, which is going to be very exciting with some very good speakers. I hope you all are excited about it. So as Luis said, my name is Olive Powell. I am the head of geospatial at the Office for National Statistics in the United Kingdom, and I co-chair the expert group on the integration of statistical and geospatial information with my colleague Claudio Stenner from Brazil. I will chair today, but Claudio will chair the other webinar that we've got on as a side event for the Statistical Commission session this year. So we're going to talk about the data disaggregation problem for SDG localization, but also for beyond. And why are we talking about integrating statistical and geospatial information? Well, effectively, having this source of information, everything you do in terms of statistics or even data manipulation means that you probably picking up lots of sources of information from lots of different places and lots of different types and lots of different formats. And actually being able to integrate these data sets together helps you have a better understanding of the world we live in and make those improved decisions and policy making proposals for the work that you're doing. And that geospatial and statistical information helps you have that understanding at geographical levels that explains the world we work around or we live around. So why it's important and why we need to have integration. For all the SDGs, for example, everything has a location, and therefore attribution and geography together provides you a complete set of data. So I mentioned about the improving decision making at all the geography level. It's also help having more focused and efficient policy making because you understand the ground truth about what's going on. It helps being more efficient in terms of resourcing, investments, and it helps also identify those or improve the quality of your statistical outputs by having that granular check. If we go to the next slide. But why do we need to disaggregate information? And this is a quote from the practical guidebook on data disaggregation for the Sustainable Development Goals. And basically, it's all about making sure that we understand the world we live in, we understand where our population is, why certain factors create certain disparities, and it's about being equal and inclusive, leaving no one behind. Everybody knows this tagline. It is understanding disparity and being able to monitor progress as we lift up disparities across the world. Next slide. So in a nutshell, we've got disaggregate data is very important to enhance decision making tailored to specific groups, increase tailored and allocation of resources, equality and inclusion, as I said. But effectively, it's having that granular, fine geographic details to support the production of statistics and to represent those different population and aspects of life that we all live with. It does provide additional methods to test our sample data, and it provides opportunities to do small area estimates when sometimes the data is not available at ground level. We're going to talk about a few examples now. So the next slide is about the UK situation with the geostatistical building blocks. So in the UK, we kind of we capture data mostly at address level, which then is combined into a set of output areas, which is our building block statistical geography, which then aggregates to different levels of geographies as you go up to the national level. And having granular data and allows us to aggregate data to output those building blocks, output area levels, and then being able to interrogate and understand the data sets from different perspectives. So there's a screenshot here about build a custom area profile, which is a tool for the public to effectively identify an area where they live. It doesn't have to be an administrative boundaries that is set, which then will extract the information for lots of different variables about what that area is like. So whether, in terms of population, gender profile, age profile, disability, ethnicity, etc., it's all in there, and you can build it up from that aggregated or disaggregated data. I'll go to the next example. So this is kind of showing you the COVID sampling. And when you disseminate data, if you disseminate it to certain geography level, you can see that sometimes in the top of that, in the map on the top, some areas where there's low density of COVID cases actually is still kind of rendered as a red, whilst there's no such thing, such a sample in reality. And so the dissemination at geographical areas sometimes masks the real information, and having access to that disaggregated data, which you can use hotspot, for example, or density map, allows you to target more specifically where the issue is. If we go and look at another example, that was the example of Taiwan. This is an example from the US, where looking at their geographic areas, they can, using some methodology, access sometimes some points data that are granular based on population data. So this is the symmetric population, but effectively is to show that there are methods to get a granular data when maybe it doesn't come in that way when the data is sourced, but it means that there's so many information that can be brought together and add value in terms of the insight that you get from that information. So what's the mandate? So our world, as we say, is becoming more and more complex, with global trends having direct impacts on localized areas. So it's understanding how, for example, climate crisis is a global effect, however, impacts so many population at localized level in a different way. And so the ECOSOC resolution understood that to be able to have that localized impact, we had to fully integrate geospatial information and seek coordination across statistical and national statistical and data systems. There are lots of sources of data that comes at global level as well, which we can harvest in terms of helping fill the gap in the data sources that we have. The UN Expert Group on Integration of Statistical and Geospatial Information was established in 2013. It was further to a mandate requesting the establishment of that Statistical Geospatial Expert Group by the UN, the Stats Commission, the 44th session, and that request was endorsed by the expert group or the Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management in that same year session. In 2017, the expert group had a strengthened mandate to coordinate all activities in the area of the integration of statistical and geospatial information. And because of this mandate from both sides, the expert group is one of the only groups that report both to the Statistical Commission and the UNDGIM. We're effectively trying to bridge the gap between the two communities, statistical and geospatial information communities, to make sure that we get a greater output and greater impact on what we do. You may have heard about the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework. If not, that's okay. You will be forgiven. It's one of the main output of the expert group. So as we got mandated to start this work, we've identified 5 principles which were adopted in early 2017. And the 5 principles are it's a framework with 5 principles meant to support greater geospatial and statistical data integration. So the 5 principles are to use foundational geospatial infrastructure geocoding. So that includes some of the foundational geospatial data themes that exist at each country level. So this could be your public task for base mapping, where you've got your topography areas, your buildings, your road networks, etc. So all that information about the world we live in supports this and starts the basis of your statistical integration. Then the second principle is about geocoded unit at record data level, making sure that each record that are captured as part of a survey, census, any kind of data sets are geocoded to the most granular level. And that could be a building, a coordinate reference, or worst case scenario, one of those building blocks as statistical geographies. Then is to have 2 common geographies to help with the dissemination of statistics. So building up on aggregating that information up, is being able to disclose information without making it sensitive and affecting data protection issues to a level that is recognized throughout the national, the country level, to compare statistical data together through geography. Then it's about having statistical and geospatial interoperability, making sure all our system works together, where data can be shared across the different systems, whether it's a statistical internal system at the National Statistical Agency or other bodies or government agencies, where you have this kind of safe space to share information. And then finally is making accessible and usable. So again, enhancing that interoperability by making it accessible, and that could be to the public through different map functions. You've seen the ones that I've presented earlier about the UK, or it could be simple, like a portal where you can download information, and then having that kind of geographical referencing that helps identify where that information is relating to. So those are the 5 principles, and basically being pushed by the expert group. But we're now starting to work with other committee of experts, because effectively the integration of geospatial and data and statistical information is not just our issue, our problem. Everybody who deals with data have challenges with data integration. So therefore, we started to collaborate with the Committee of Experts on Big Data and Data Science to look at how we can bring that data together. And a lot of big data and a lot of geospatial data are big data. So things like meteorological data and phenomena, Earth observation are captured in ever-increasing resolution, very small, very, very granular resolution, and more often than ever before. All this obviously takes quite a lot of space and needs to be brought together in a way that is sustainable and adds value. So finally, the task team, this is like a few lists, and hopefully we'll be able to share this, or you'll be able to pause it on the recording later. But these are some of the promises that we made ourselves in the first iteration of our collaboration, and as part of our GSGF framework, some of the the goals that we wanted to achieve. And we're looking at further collaboration opportunities with the Committee of Experts of Big Data and Data Science, but also others, to make sure that we can embed those principles and those goals. So this is me giving you a bit of a summary and a quick tour of what the expert group is about and why disaggregation is very important. And in the real world, you might have super good data capture at granular level, which actually gives you all this plethora of information and to do your policy making. But we don't live in a perfect world, and sometimes data that comes in where it's not broken down at the granular level, and we need to kind of understand how to disaggregate it. So we've got really good presentations today from these panelists here, and I'm really grateful for all the presenters to come here and join us today. So without further ado, I will pass on for our first segment. We're going to talk about solving data disaggregation for SDG localization. And we're going to ask our colleagues from the OECD, Claudia and Alessandro, to kickstart our presentations. So we can see your slides, but not in presentation mode.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to put my screen in presentation mode right now. Again. This is the price to pay, being first, because everybody is waiting for me, and voila.
That looks good. All right, over to you.
It's just on my wrong screen, so I'll be looking away, but you'll excuse me if I don't look right in the camera. So thank you everybody for joining us today for this side event. Today from the OECD, it will be me, Claudia Baranzelli. I'm leader of the OECD Geospatial Lab, and my colleague, Alessandro Alasia. And we will try to give you a brief overview of initiatives from the OECD lenses that are related to enhancing availability, accessibility, and interoperability of data useful for SDG localization. So basically everything Olive has just presented to you. I'll start with just a couple of words about the OECD Laboratory for Geospatial Analysis, which is one of the initiatives that is contributing at the OECD to advance especially the data agenda that's supporting the localization process of SDGs. The Geospatial Lab is really an initiative to encourage the widespread use and production of geospatial data analysis. We leverage an international community that is quite broad and covers stakeholders from the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. We do want to share knowledge and cooperate in also the production and not only the use of geospatial data. When it comes to the localization of SDGs, as I mentioned before, the OECD work goes beyond the production of data. Since 2018, actually, we have set up, and when I say we, now it's OECD beyond the Geospatial Lab, we have set up an ambitious program to support both cities and regions to develop, implement, and monitor strategies to achieve the SDGs. So there is a lot of work that has been done. We have developed indicator frameworks. We have sustained and promoted policy dialogues. We produce toolkits to really encourage regional and local authorities to work on this. And we have also fostered the city-to-city partnership, again, to encourage knowledge exchange between local governments. And just last year, we, besides publishing the last report on localizing the SDG in a changing landscape, so basically taking stock of where we are right now in the process, we have also published an updated version of our SDG online tool that helps regions and cities to measure their distance to the SDGs. I will not spend many words here, but just to say that, of course, from an international organization perspectives, for us it's important to promote a framework that can help and can sustain international comparabilities. For instance, when it comes to geographical units, we are using comparable units, so common definitions, for instance, for functional urban areas. And we have developed harmonized definitions for more than 100 indicators. Now, this sounds very impressive, but it's not enough. So we do have so many indicators for so many regions and cities, but yet that's not enough. There is a data gap that we need to cover. And I apologize, this chart is slightly outdated, but I think the main message is the same and is confirmed. Even with all these indicators, for instance, if we think just about regions, which are slightly better or easier to cover compared to cities in terms of data availability, still we are able to address with our indicators only around 60% of the targets that we should cover. Why it's happening this? We have, during the last year, also leveraged a survey that we sent through to cities and regions to actually investigate which data are used to monitor SDGs. And from the replies we got, it was evident that most local and regional governments use local and regional data, so between 70 and 60%. Very few local and regional governments, or at least fewer governments, rely on alternative data sources. And what's actually a little bit more uplifting is that other territorial stakeholders, such as research organizations or universities, do use alternative data sources more frequently. But still, I must say, not enough. Why not enough? Because there are indeed a lot of new opportunities to move forward what we have been now discussing since the beginning of this event, towards increasing the availability, accessibility, and interoperability of the data that we use. Why this? Because indeed, as Olive said, the way data are produced and released is changing quite fast. There is an ongoing democratization process of both the data and tools. So with a growing volume of increasing granular data that is made available, there is an increasing number of stakeholders that are now popping up on the world stage, working at global scale and producing and releasing new data, and this without mentioning the new big player of AI. Now, in this context, we believe that there is an emerging data space that has a high potential to support SDGs monitoring, and not only that. And I want just to highlight three important qualifiers when it comes to this data space. And these are open, micro, and geospatial. So open, because we're talking more and more about data that are openly accessible, usable, editable, and shareable by anybody for any purpose. Micro, because from a statistical perspective, we are referring to unit-level data that are obtained, for instance, from sample surveys or censuses. And geospatial, because we do want, and we're talking about data, about objects or events or phenomena that are related to a specific location on Earth. So data that is attached to an explicit geographic positioning information. So why are we also feeling excited about these new opportunities? Well, actually, the Geospatial Lab, in collaboration with other international institutions such as the World Bank, IMF, UN Statistics, UN Habitat, and Statistics Canada, we, let's say, engaged in a very interesting conversation with a number of speakers for recently a workshop on buildings data. And I will let my colleague Alessandra Lasia bringing you and summarizing some of the main insights from this discussion and what this can bring also to this workshop. Thank you, Alessandra.
Thank you, Claudia. In fact, as you mentioned, it was an event, a one-day event. We originally were thinking about a 2 hours event, but in the end, it was actually difficult to fit all the speaker in one day, and that really speaks to the interest that this type of data generated. And you have here a list of all the participants, and what you can see is that they are from the public sector, the private sector, the research sector. There are national statistical offices, there are non-profit, and there are international organizations. So it's really a multitude of stakeholders that are all working in this emerging space. So if we move to the next slide, we'll just present some insights that came out of this discussion, this one-day discussion. Again, it's difficult to summarize in one slide, but there are certainly 4 points that came out. The first one is that there are many initiatives that are working toward the same goal. Really, there is sometimes a lot of duplication of effort, particularly when it comes to conflation, integration, and validation of the data. So there was a general sense that we could do better through some form of collaboration. The second point that really came out quite clearly is that there is no single data source that is perfect, but is the integration of this geospatial data and the conflation of data from different sources that can generate really powerful database to support local analysis and insight. So if you take one single provider, being from one of the big tech or from public sector, you get different quality of data, but the power is really in the integration and the conflation of these sources. The other message that came out is that there is no single database that works for all users, and it's not just about footprints. So the quality here is really about fitness for purposes. There are some databases that are good for some application, other that are better suited for more global, for instance, analysis and application. And all these databases provide different type of information. Sometimes it's well beyond the geometry of the building footprint. But it's really about high-value foundational databases. So there is a common denominator in all these initiatives, which is a key set of attributes that has really high value for all the stakeholders and for all the applications. So stakeholders can use this foundational base and then add information for their own application. So there is this element of foundational database. Moving to the next slide, through the workshop, we saw many use cases. Many of them have significant potential for SDG. In fact, what you see here in the first bullet is actually from a technical briefing of the UN that shows how building data have ramification implication for many of the SDG, 8 of the 17. Again, you have some of them listed here. But what we saw through this workshop is that there are really 3 main areas of use cases. One is related to energy efficiency and net zero transition, because buildings are contributing to greenhouse emission, and therefore the use of building data can support policy design, monitoring, and analysis of energy efficiency and net zero transition. The second area is climate risk assessment and disaster management. We saw a study and analysis of building microdata used to assess the risk and the potential financial impact of natural disaster. And unfortunately, we saw many of them happening in recent year. And the final use case is urban morphology, because there is a great diversity of urban forms, and different urban forms are often having a major impact on the quality of life of citizens. So the use of building microdata can really support this type of analysis. And moving to the final slide, it's not just about SDG. I think that was already mentioned. It's also beyond that. And in this workshop, we saw application of building microdata to support the development of statistical infrastructure, like national registers, as well as statistical operation, like census operation. And we saw the example of Uruguay and Tunisia that presented at this workshop, exactly working with microdata, building microdata in this area for census and for the development of register. But it's also an opportunity for countries that have more developed statistical infrastructure, but maybe want to modernize their statistical infrastructure. And we saw an example from Statistics Canada that's currently exploring the potential of open building microdata to augment information on the Stats Canada building register. And moving to the last slide, the closing remarks. So the open geospatial microdata are really emerging as a high potential domain for analysis, policy making, and statistical operation. And it's really about high value foundational database. I think that there was a consensus about this term, foundational database, that can support SDG and a broad range of research and decision making needs. What we discussed during this workshop is that, of course, there are many challenges ahead. Some of them are technical, using open source processes, for instance, and standard and infrastructure, as well as issues related to governance frameworks, how we collaborate, what business model are we going to adopt, and what organizational structure are we going to adopt. And with this, I'll close it. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claudio and Alessandro. Very impactful and clear presentation. I'll hand over straight to our colleague from the US, Joshua.
Greetings, everyone. I hope you can see my screen okay
Yep.
at this point.
Yeah, working fine.
Excellent. Okay, so this next piece, I am first Joshua Coots. I'm a geographer in the U.S. Census Bureau, and I'm currently the branch chief of the International and National Engagement Branch in Israel. Pleasure to be here today with all of my colleagues around the world. Let me get right into it. So this was a perfect introduction for me to now provide an operational example of how we at the U.S. Census Bureau are creating and using geospatial data sets in our work. I know everyone on this call, we all constantly strive for more efficient and effective use of our resources, the resources we have available. And in line with the Census Bureau's goals for transformation and modernization, we in the Geography Division are focused on the use of new tools and methods to help with these goals, including making use of freely available and regularly updated satellite imagery, using parcel data that now includes nearly full coverage for our nation, and the incorporation of data science principles and machine learning. And so we are actively working to extract as much useful information as we can with these data and techniques, and link these innovative geospatial data to our traditional census and survey sources. So within our organization, it's the responsibility of the Geography Division to maintain up-to-date information about addresses, features such as roads, and also boundaries. And so historically, we've accomplished this through partnerships with the U.S. Postal Service and tribal, state, and local governments. We're now using machine learning to help us keep track of locations and the associated addresses of where people might live, and identify change in these locations, and then link these data to supplemental administrative data sources. And the schematic on the screen here provides an overview of this process. First, we use moderate resolution satellite imagery to identify areas experiencing change. Next, using a common geographic unit, 1 kilometer square grid, we request high resolution satellite imagery for those specific areas to further refine the areas of interest and identify new or changed structures. And then finally, we integrate these areas of interest with parcel or property level information to help identify addresses or other attributes like building type to the structures that we've identified. So this is now possible because satellite imagery for the entire nation is freely available and updated on a bi-weekly basis. Improvements to our national parcel data sets have also opened access to critical new address sources and joined with a variety of different address registers and administrative sources. So to slide 1, this is digging into the detail here of that schematic. So this slide represents the first step I mentioned, using moderate resolution satellite imagery to simply detect change. So the yellow outline you see shows our 1 kilometer grid cell, our unit of work in this model. The satellite data in these images is coming from the Sentinel-2 satellite on May 25th, 2023. The blocks of colored data result from our use of NASA's observational products for end users from remote sensing analysis known as OPERA. And in red, you can see where OPERA's vegetation disturbance duration product indicates change from a vegetative state to a cleared construction site for longer than 30 days. So using these data, we can pinpoint areas of potential growth and move to the next step, which is in step 2, we download high resolution imagery. Here we have from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's Maxar Global Enhanced API. You can see the yellow highlighted 1 kilometer grid is the same as on the previous slide, but the imagery is much clearer, as you can see. So on the image on the left, you can see the area before the change was detected. And on the right, you can see the detailed changes based on the high resolution imagery. We also add another layer of data in this step, building footprints, as previously mentioned, these really useful data sets. And we use USA structures or Microsoft building footprints as a source for update and validation. So we're also extracting our own building footprints internally. So this data helps us track detailed changes over time. And on the right, you can see structures highlighted in different colors depending on when the data was captured. So keeping track of when we see that change. And then it's on to step 3, where we integrate the newly identified structures with parcel data. So the parcel data that we are using contains information about the specific address, like 1 Main Street, the postal delivery, but also the structure type, like single family home or apartment building. And in this image, you can see our automated change detection model has identified new housing within that pink swath there, and which we've identified after overlaying this parcel data and point data. So we're able to use this to capture new address information, or use this to identify geocodes for addresses that were previously ungeocoded, meaning we can assign the address to a specific census block and start to understand the structure, the nature of the housing or structures that we've identified. They may not be housing. This could be commercial. It could be some other type of structure that we've identified, and we can begin to make educated estimates based on this ground level observation, or use it as truth for other models, including beginning to create dashboards tied to databases of aggregated geospatial statistics to better understand an area according to particular metrics, and using these data to then drive our modeling and making operational decisions. So this first dashboard shows us the amount of automated change detected between 2020 and 2021 by actual square meters of change, with red indicating more change. Maricopa County, Arizona had nearly 30 million square meters of change detected, and that's just between 2020 and 2021. Other counties also, it's indicated there, experience high levels of growth. We can then join these data to our statistical population and housing data collected through our census and surveys to provide critical information on the exposure, vulnerability, and resilience of U.S. businesses and people to the impacts of disasters and weather hazards through an application we call Community Resilience Estimates, or CRE. So the Census Bureau is able to easily adapt the estimates as needed to incorporate the latest and most relevant data because of our solid base of geospatial data that we've integrated with these statistics. For example, after the publication of the Community Resilience Estimates, we worked with Arizona State University, located in one of our hottest and driest states, to begin joining local environmental and weather data with our existing data sets to create measures of social vulnerability to heat exposure. So this is just one example of the possibilities available to us when we integrate geospatial and statistical data. And with that, we'll thank everybody for your attention and turn it over to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. Amazing. Very good use case. Shall I call Lewis?
Yes, you can.
Yes. Brilliant.
Let me see if this
The Joint
works.
Centre, yes, from the European Commission. I'll leave it to you.
Okay, so I will try and stick to time and talk a little bit about why population grids are so incredibly cool. They really are key for not just SDG localization, but almost everything I do uses them. So what's a population grid? It's a representation of the population distribution on a regular grid, usually used in a raster or a vector format. It could be nighttime population, aka resident population, but it could also be daytime population. Now, why are they so cool? It's because they have the same shape and size across the world. Here you can see a little map. It's from the Netherlands, 2 municipalities. You see a population density left on per municipality, right on the grid. And on the right, you can see those 2 little settlements, high density areas circled. On the left, you can only see one of them. And that's, in a nutshell, the problem with municipalities, census enumeration areas. Their massive differences in their size and shape makes it very difficult to use harmonized data, produce harmonized settlement characteristics, and it produces a lot of other problems. So it's known as the modifiable areal unit problem. The other thing I love about the grid is they're stable over time. You know, every census you get new enumeration areas. Not with the grid. It's the same now. It's the same 500 years ago. It'll be same 500 years from now. The other thing I love about them is that the boundaries are copyright free. Try to get the boundaries of a census enumeration area in many countries across the world, and you'll be bumping into copyright issues. You have to pay for them. You might not be able to share them. They might be in the wrong resolution. The boundaries of the grid are beautiful. And it makes it so much easier to integrate with other data. You can overlay it with other layers. You can aggregate it up to whatever custom zone you want. And that's very important because I can never tell a policymaker, hey, look at these 5 million data points, right? That nobody can do that. But because they're so versatile, you can aggregate it to whatever you want. And other spatial units really don't have that. Wanted to give you a quick example. This is a harmonized city data collection. Thomas already put the link in the chat. We call it the Urban Center Database, or for those with a more cheeky disposition, we call it Stats in the City. We use a UN Statistical Commission endorsed harmonized definition called the degree of urbanization. That's the same cities are used to define the functional urban areas, which Claudia mentioned earlier. And we have global coverage. We cover from 1975, even with a bit of projection up to 2030, and it's spatially explicit. We have centroids for each city, we have their boundaries, and you can use it in whatever format you want. Now, one of the reasons I'm a big fan of this is because we've moved a step up in facilitating cooperation. Harmonized definitions are critical for comparisons, but this, because we can share the boundaries, also allows whoever has some spatial layer to produce data using the same boundaries and can aggregate it up to the same database using the city IDs. And so it's really creating a collaborative platform. So we can ingest a lot of data here. And there on the right-hand side, you see the global coverage data set, and we have external contributors. So if NASA or ESA or WorldPop or whatever organization wants to provide their data for these 11,000 cities, they can. And they can share it with us, and we can also share it through this database. So I think this is really a step change. Because all the information is open and transparent, you can also use it to integrate it. So you can characterize cities. For example, on the left, you see Lyon. You can count how many people are in there. But you can also characterize the cities according to what other area they're in, not just country. Here in the middle is an example of the Rio Grande River catchment area. So you can identify which cities are in that catchment area or not. And the options here are really, really endless. So I really think that's a key aspect for localizing information, combining information, and using a geospatial framework. So really a population grid that is used globally, which is stable, can really help tremendously. So I think I will stop here in the interest of time. And thank you.
Thank you, Lewis. Swift but impactful. Pier Giorgio, are you ready to keep going in the flow of amazing presentations? I'm sure you will.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I think you should see my screen now.
Yes,
but not
it's not
in the presentation mode. Yes,
yeah, that's
change.
right. Yeah, working fine.
Okay. So good afternoon to almost 100 participants. That's amazing. 97 are registered and hopefully listening. It's a pleasure for me to present today on behalf of the United Nations Group of Experts on Geographical Names and provide you with some information on one activity, a concept of unique identifiers for cities, and that fits very well and touches on Louis' presentation a little bit. I will switch off my camera now due to bandwidth problems. So some of you may know the United Nations Group of Experts, that it is mandated by the Economic and Social Council, like the Statistical Commission, and it is one of its 18 subsidiary bodies to ECOSOC. And the World Geographical Names database is the go-to source for authoritative, comparable and high quality geographical names on the UN level. And the concept of the unique identifiers is related to the redesign and promotion of the World Geographical Names database. And the database itself, it serves as mechanism for managing geographical names for cities. And the data sources come from member states as well as from the United Nations agencies or initiatives like UN Data, the Demographic Yearbook, and so on. This is an example where you can see the content, so geographical names in 6 official UN languages, including also the endonyms, so the original versions in the original script. And all countries, 193 members of 193 member states are in, and all cities over 100,000 inhabitants. So at the national level, so the question why Angegen is proposing this UUID for cities. At the national level, several statistical classifications exist to enable the integration and interoperability of data, such as M49 or ISO 3. Subnationally, there are several globally recognized geographies like SALP or Digurba, for the dissemination of statistical data within the monitoring and reporting frameworks for global agendas, such as the Agenda 2030 for SDGs. We have identified that at least 7 of the SDG 11 indicator require some form of spatial data collection and analysis at a local and urban level. Yet there is no globally sustainable and consistent identifier for cities. Thus, to support sustainable and consistent data integration across a variety of use cases, the UNGEGEN is working on this establishment of a UUID for the city, aligned with prevailing definitions from UN Habitat and from country-provided data. This is the position paper which includes the concept for the creation of a unique identifiers for cities and identifies also URIs and UUIDs as sustainable mechanisms for their creation. And UNGEGEN is working with the Secretariat to provide a pilot implementation of the UUIDs for the World Geographical Names Database in support of UN Data, the One UN Geospatial Situation Room, and other global initiatives. The document itself, it has been endorsed by the expert group on integration of statistical and geospatial information at its meeting in Nairobi in 2024. The potential benefits are that better integration of data on cities is possible, a better management of geographical names across languages and linguistic scripts, of course, more interoperability of locally produced city indicators is possible. And what is of importance to this event today is number 4 and number 5, that in the context of the side event, city level and localized indicators are supported, as well as the disaggregation of information at the city level. And finally, it enhances the regional and territorial perspective on the monitoring of the SDGs itself. To conclude my presentation, a short timeline, we will submit a paper to UNGEGEN to its next session, and we seek for adoption. The same will apply for UNGGIM. We seek for endorsement because UNGEGEN reports to UNGGIM every year. And the plan is to submit also this paper to the Statistical Commission next year and to promote and seek for endorsement. The Secretariat will, of course, be mandated, hopefully, to take over the collaboration with the UN agencies, UN Habitat, UN Term, and so on, to implement this concept in the UN system and to facilitate that the World Geographical Names database is a crucial database in the UN data ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piergiorgio. And this brings us to the last presentation from Robert.
Thank you so much, Olive. Let me know if you can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Let me just get up my slides shortly.
May I ask Pierre and Lewis if you could turn off your cameras for the webinar recording as well? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let me know if you can see my slides.
We can see your presenter mode with your notes. Well, there's no notes, but it's not the presentation mode.
Is that okay
yes.
now?
Perfect. Over to you.
Super. All right, so thanks a lot, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all who have joined us today. Names are Robert Ndugwa, Chief of Data and Analytics at UN Habitat. And from the side of UN Habitat, of course, we just wanted to connect this specific topic, particularly the SDG localization and the interactions with why we need to strengthen the data elements, particularly the geospatial, but also the statistical connections. And the grounding for our work is very much from a couple of mandates. One is a decision from our own UN Habitat Executive Board that sat in 2021. that very much brought in forth the normative side of strengthening our work around SDG localization. And this was premised on the idea that we will not succeed with the SDGs if we don't localize them, or if we don't empower the local systems, at least to facilitate and carry the heavy lifting of all the work that we need to do around SDGs. And that is primarily because about 60 or 70% of SDG targets or indicators require some form of localization. And of course, that has also been reinforced very much into our priorities, but also the UN Habitat Assembly, where there was a localization of SDGs, particularly interacting that with the multi-level governance that needs to function for the SDGs to succeed. So from UN Habitat, we've crafted our approach through sort of 3 pillars. One is basically our work stream, which covers the technical cooperation around it, localizing SDGs, but also the global advocacy and then the knowledge development or production phase. And that is anchored very much into an approach or approaches where we work through an SDG cities initiative, basically giving tools to cities to work and produce data, and then turn that into knowledge products or actions that come through as voluntary local reviews or voluntary national reviews. And all that is very much informed through a harmonized approach in how we produce the data, and that's the global urban monitoring framework. The principles here for us are very much making sure that we leave no one behind, and particularly leaving no place behind. And of course, that carries the flag for cities and local governments. But at the same level, we do recognize that we need to make sure we have a structure of functioning multi-level governances. So basically building from the local or city level, local governments, bringing that to the regional and then national and potentially global. So for the data component, we do work with a framework that was developed very much with consultation of many stakeholders, many of whom are also on the call today. But the Global Urban Monitoring Framework, what it has done is to help us harmonize the components of the urban on the side of SDGs and bring forth also the components of the new urban agenda. And all this, of course, interacts through different systems of data. So citizens-generated data, geospatial information and data, but also routine statistical data sets. And this is structured through 4 main objectives on safe and peaceful, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable, and then works through the 5 domains on society, economy, environment, culture, and governance and implementation. There are quite a number of cities now that are already implementing this sort of framework, and I'll just point out that much later. But in practical terms, what this all means is that when you go down to a city or to any local government and you want to apply this sort of framework, we do have, good examples that are currently going on today. First, we did recognize that a lot of the cities and a lot of local governments today are very much challenged in terms of the actual tools, but also the empowerment in terms of the capacity to apply some of those tools. So what we've been doing, of course, is to make sure that we unpack and train and provide capacity to a lot of these local governments for them to feel confident to apply some of these tools. And of course, being open source or open access becomes a key principle for them to be able to apply some of those tools. As Lewis noted, the degree of urbanization here is very important because you need to be able to identify all these geographies in a way that is very consistent. So that's something we've been applying. But at the same time, we have examples around tracking urbanization trends in terms of the growth spatially, but also connecting that with the demographics and other service-related elements that we've been monitoring at that local level include access to transport, but also access to open public spaces. Now, we'll just quickly run through some of those examples. I think Ruth spoke very well about the population grids, or in general, the grids that we are currently working with. But essentially what these do is that you have a common geography that then allows you to monitor almost systematically and in a very harmonized manner the same geographies, and of course monitoring the growth and expansion of all those areas. The other component that we've been looking at, of course, is tracking urbanization very much at scale. The key question here that many local governments keep asking is, where is my urban areas changing? Why is it changing? And what can I do about it? So these are all local questions that require, of course, applying global tools, but enabling them to answer some of these questions. And of course, the connection between that is the population element. If my city is growing, how much is my population shifting or changing? And does that warrant me to plan better or to plan for expansion? If my city, for example, is shrinking in terms of its population, what does it mean for the urban planning? So all these elements are very much local questions that require some sort of global solutions. And that's why these tools have been applied very well at that local level. The one on transport basically comes in as transport being a key service. It's a basic services in any city to function. And key questions that we see coming in from many local governments, leaders or mayors is usually what sort of public transport exists in my city? What sort of infrastructure do I have? Where is it located? How is it distributed? So these are all answers that come through from the aspect of the geospatial data analytics, but at the same time connecting it very much to where are the people actually located and which of these populations do require what sort of service in terms of transport. And that, of course, applies whether it's on water or sanitation. So we see the same applying very much around the distribution and access to open public spaces in cities. Again, almost the core questions that are being asked. Where are the recreational services? Where are these open public spaces? Who has access to them? And who doesn't have? And how do I make sure they get distributed almost uniformly to all these populations? The other element we've also been looking at the local level is very much monitoring and tracking the changes in green spaces. And of course, for many cities, unfortunately, as they expand, we see a lot of shrinking of those green spaces. And again, this is very much a local question around planning, but also the environment of what we have in our cities. So quite a number of these examples, excuse me, that we do have been tested in quite a number of cities, applying the degree of urbanization approach, applying the urban monitoring framework, and then going through to produce the evidence and actions through voluntary local review reports. So these examples are available from quite a number of countries, but very much at the local level. And that sort of experience has also taught us that if you're going to strengthen any sort of national or local level data collection or coordination, we do require, of course, as we noted today, leveraging technologies. We need to also foster an idea of how we can transfer the knowledge we have to these local communities and ensure that they apply them at that local level. And I think if we do that, we'll see a lot of potential in terms of achieving the aims and the spirit of localizing the SDGs, but at the same time ensuring that these tools that are very effective today can be very much targeted at that local level and allowing solutions to be developed at that very local level. So I'll stop at that and hand over the floor back to you, Olive. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I'm like really amazed by the content of this these presentations. So thank you all for coming and being such distinguished speakers. I will now, considering the time, pass on to my colleague Ashwell and Rolando, who will facilitate the discussion part of this webinar. So I'll sit back and let you lead this.
Thanks, Olive. Welcome, everyone. So I'm Ashwell Jenniker. I'm from Statistics South Africa. So greetings here from South Africa. So Stats SA is the official stats agency in South Africa. And for us to respond to policy needs, we have to, on an annual basis, have something like 800 indicators. That's if you look at SDGs, Agenda 2063, and then our national development plan that we need in South Africa. When you look at the SDGs alone, we've got about 242 indicators that we need to respond to. And in South Africa, we only respond to about 72% of these indicators. So we're not doing too well. As a stats agency, we produce about 270 reports every year. So every day a report comes out, but still that is not enough, especially when you look at low-level data. And here we're looking at the census. The census is our main source. But censuses are too few and far between. I mean, we've got one every 10 years in South Africa. They're just much, much too expensive. So what's the answer? I mean, you need to look at the data ecosystem. So we need to bring in this geospatial data that was being presented on. And so very exciting for us being part of this, because the presentations are definitely part of the solution. Globally, what we've got is the UN Global Platform. Now, the UN Global Platform is part of the committee of experts on big data and data science for official statistics. And what this is a partnership of more than 100 agencies, development agencies, stats organizations, private sector agencies around the globe that's working as part of the data ecosystem to see how do you utilize big data, how do you utilize AI and data science for official statistics. And what I'm asking today is for you to join. I mean, I want you to find out more about the UN Global Platform and see how do you become part of this global community that can solve the issues, that can look at the data and local data that's needed to provide for policy needs like the SDGs. I will stop there. Rolando, let me hand over to you.
Thank you as well. Dear colleagues, as you can see, as each of the excellent previous intervention has shown, the importance and necessity of integrating geospatial and statistical information for decision maker are undisputed, especially in implementing and monitoring the 2030 agenda in subnational territorial units. ECLAC has worked for several years on some lines of action that are fundamental to making this premise a reality in Latin America and the Caribbean. On the one hand, we have strongly support disseminating and implementing the United Nations guidelines to integrate statistical and geospatial information through the Global Statistical and Geospatial Framework, the GSGF. And in the process, special attention has been paid to promoting the use of disaggregated fundamental data to support the geocoding process over statistical data. The definition and use of common geographies to disseminate this statistical data, and the implementation of geospatial standards in the production of statistics, both traditional and from new and modern sources of information. On the other hand, from ECLAC, we have support implementing information system through open source technologies that facilitate the interoperability between geospatial and statistical data, promoting the implementation of open data ecosystems under robust international and regional standards. As a result, and a practical example is a project funded by the European Union with the support of Eurostat and the national statistical offices of 7 countries in our region have now in operation geoportals able to disseminate disaggregated data that can be used for the purposes of the SDG localization and monitoring. However, these 2 lines of work will now achieve fruitful results without consolidating common institutional strategies between statistical offices and national geographic institutes. Here in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have established ourselves as the technical secretariat of the Statistical Conference of the Americas and of the Regional Geospatial Community. It means UNGGIM Americas. We have, in this regard, carried out common activities to converge on joint work plans. This has facilitated working at the national level with both institutions in the region, in our countries, bringing the parties closer together, defining shared roadmaps, and implementing international standards and frameworks to integrate statistical data with national geospatial information on dissemination platforms, all under conditions of interoperability, accessibility, and open data. Several of our statistical and geographical colleagues from the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean present today have advanced in the implementation of these roadmaps, observing international standards and good practices related to the principles of the GSGF as a fundamental instrument for the generation of official statistics. In summary, in our region, we have made valuable progress in data dissemination. The challenge now is to increase the use of this geospatially disaggregated data in the production of the SDG indicators and their dissemination through subnational territorial units. This achievement is essential to promote good practices and successful use cases related to any part of this process, whether in the area of data management, the use of geospatial technologies, or the establishment of institutional agreement between statistical and geospatial offices, including involved in the management, that for the Agenda 33 implementation. Likewise, it is essential to work in the international and regional scale to promote intergovernmental spaces and define common projects among member states that allow the increasing availability of statistical data and geospatial enabled SDG localization. Let me turn again to my colleague, as well, just to begin with the process of some questions that we are going to have to ask to the panelists in this regard. As well, you have the voice.
Thank you, Rolando. And thanks, Luis. Luis shared the link to get to the UN Global Platform. So there you will read about the 8 task teams, and you can decide which of those task teams you can join. I'll ask questions to Claudia, Joshua, and Luis. Maybe you can put your cameras on and let me ask all 3 questions, and then Claudia, you'll deal with the first one, Joshua, and then Luis after that. Okay. Claudia, let's start with open geospatial microdata. Now, what can we do to make this data more accessible and more usable, especially when you look at the intergovernmental level? So what must we do, and how can we do it to make open geospatial data more accessible and more usable? Joshua. So what are the major challenges? I'm thinking of building footprint data, but you can also look at other small level geospatial data. But what are the major challenges for sharing and compatibility of this data? And what can we do about these challenges? Luis, yeah, I agree with you that global standardized population grid is very cool. I totally agree with you. Now, when we look at the development of a global standardized population grid, so do we think the current frameworks provide a sufficient foundation to develop these? I mean, do we just have enough in place? And what can be done? I mean, what can we do to make sure that we are able to develop these population grids? Claudia, let's start with you.
Thank you, Ashwell, for the question, which is impossible to address in a couple of minutes. So I'll just throw out some ideas and hopefully food for thought. And I do hope that with my fellow speakers and with the attendees, there will be a follow-up indeed. So I think I want to build on really this ongoing discussion that is happening after the workshop that we have organized just less than a month ago on buildings data. And really between us, the OECD, UN Statistics, UN Habitat, the International Monetary Fund, we're really interrogating ourselves about what could be the role of international organizations in all these. We know we can somehow summarize what the problem is. And I think I want to start from these 2 points, 2 main points at least. There are many others, but 2 main points. One is the lack of coordination, or if coordination is too much of a big word, lack of optimization of efforts. So there are many, many initiatives ongoing. None is better than the others in absolute terms. They are all valid depending on the intended use that you would like to see for the data product that you are proposing. So this is one point. And the second point is the lack of trust. And I think this is super, super important. And it comes from a lack of explanation on one hand, understanding from the other hand of how and for which purposes a specific data product can be used for. And I think the role of international organizations, I put OECD, of course, in the bunch, is really to leverage our convening power to bring together different stakeholders, both from the producer side and the user side, to have a dialogue and together to start building trust. Now, how to do this? Again, I'm going beyond the 2 minutes. But some concrete steps that may help at least to initiate this dialogue, for instance, that I can think of, is to map use cases and data requirements on one hand and available data products on the other hand. So already understanding what's out there, what can be used and for which purpose, that already helps to put on the map different producers and users and understanding the added value of each of them. So who is the strongest when it comes to specific skills or specific contributions that it can bring? For instance, Alessandro before he mentioned data conflation. That's one very specific technical task, but there are many, many others. And indeed, there are some transversal issues that I think need to be addressed in a little bit more coordinated way, or at least discussed in a more coordinated way. They may be related to standards, they may be related to governance, to privacy, licensing issues. So all these issues that are transversal, they do need an international, and transversal setting to be addressed, and that could be the role of international organizations. So I know I didn't reach really a conclusion, but I hope I planted some seeds, and I welcome also feedback from my fellow speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. That's useful. Joshua, go for it.
Yeah, I'll start with agreeing with Claudia. This is a big topic, and so we're only going to be able to briefly touch on a few points. The first I would say is just quickly time. Time is difficult in terms of producing building footprint data at regular intervals. Tracking change means you need to refresh that data frequently. So that can be a challenge. Putting together the database once is a challenge. Doing it frequently with using similar techniques so that the data is comparable, that's a real challenge. So I know that that's something that we're working on internally here. The second, again, I don't know if I can do justice to it, but just the integration of these databases. Once you have built you have your building footprint data, the real value is being able to integrate that with other data sets. So, you know, we're all dealing with massive databases, and we know that interoperability is difficult. So doing something as simple as developing a universal unique building identifier that's tied to those building footprints, and then adhering to that is difficult. And then aligning between a variety of databases that have different functions and sources, such as maybe linking between a census address registry and administrative health registries with location data, and then tying to a business registry, all using that same building identifier that then ties to the building footprint, maybe to find the number of pharmacies within a population center that are walkable from some particular building footprint. that's a real challenge, but that's the goal of these databases, to be able to do something like that. So something as simple as data format discrepancy between databases can be really difficult to deal with. So it's kind of a second order problem that I see with these building footprint. But that's really the value of the building footprints, is being able to link with all that data and having that common on the ground ground truth, so to speak. And it's, as with all of the projects that we deal with, it's working from a common accepted data definition and then rigorously adhering to those data standards. I'll stop there just for time.
Thanks, Joshua. And I mean, imagine also costly to update these things and keep them up to date.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lewis, let's move on to you. Thanks.
Well, I picked a smaller topic than the two previous colleagues, so I made my life maybe unfairly easy. But it's not all easy, and we are not there yet for a global standard population grid. We still have lots of issues. Different countries use different projections, different starting points. They don't match very well. So I'm really an advocate of trying to make this as simple as possible so that we can really have a standard that everybody can contribute to, right? I work for the European Union. We struggle to get 27 different countries, and there's even a couple more in the statistical system to produce data together. And when you're producing grid data on the border, you need to agree, okay, I'm just going to put my debt population. Can you add yours and have that sequenced? But what I'm really going to advocate for is, you've heard of the degree of urbanization. Multiple speakers mentioned it already. The key thing for that is you need an equal area projection. So I would advocate use mole-wide equal area projections. Let's agree on the starting point and let's fix it. And then for me, the first best solution for a pop grid is official point-based data. It can be a geocoded census, and more countries are doing that. And that really creates such a detailed picture. It's fantastic. Or you can have a geocoded population register that's popular in Denmark, for example. You need to do a lot of work to clean it, to make sure that people who have moved on or passed away are out of there, etc. But that can, again, be a very detailed information. Combining it with buildings or an address register, you can also produce very good data. But that's essentially point-based. The second best for me is a disaggregation grid. But then you need to work with open population data, ideally, at the finest spatial level, but then you need census enumeration areas, then you need the boundaries, then you need very detailed boundaries of those enumeration areas, and you need covariates, like the building footprints we saw, but you would want to exclude the non-residential building footprints, right? So the number of occupied dwellings from cadastral information can also be useful to disaggregate. But I think those are the two ways of producing a population grid. But what we're doing now, and there's multiple actors in this field, they're producing global population grid. The JRC's global human settlement layer is one, but I also quite like the world pop constrained global grid. We're putting out information there at the global level. But if we're doing this collectively and are able to integrate better and more detailed grids, then we're increasing the quality, and we're setting up a system where every country, every statistical office can contribute to a better global product. And I think that would be incredibly powerful, especially when we're also starting to look for settlements, when we're interested in exposure to risk. Census enumeration areas in the countryside, when you're looking for risk for floods or mudslides or earthquakes, it's just not good enough. You really need that detail that you can only get from the grid. So for me, the grid is a critical resource, and I really want to make sure we all contribute to that. And the sooner we collectively agree, this is the projection, this is the starting point, this is what we're going to use, and set in place an elegant system to be able to allow different parties to contribute to that, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lewis. As long as we start somewhere and NSOs just do their part and also contribute. Thanks. Rolando, now that we've got no more time left, I'll hand over to you and make sure that you finish off in time. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you. I wonder if Pier Giorgio and Robert can turn on your cameras. because Pier Giorgio, I would like to ask you what governance is needed to ensure the long-term sustainability and consistent use of unique identifier for cities across multiple data ecosystems. And Robert, if you can, I would like to ask what additional practical steps can be taken to support SDG localization through improved integration of geospatial and statistical data? And in this context, how can a city knowledge hub enhance coordination and data sharing practices to drive more effective SDG implementation? And I have another question from the audience for all of the five that wants to respond. As is, it comes from our colleague Tahueda Baza, and he says that I'm curious to hear more from the speakers or hosts. I'm curious to hear more from the speakers how these data have been used to address policy demands or used to monitor existing national strategies and plans. Now, Pier Giorgio, you have the voice, and after Robert, and then after the colleagues that want to answer this question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rolando, for this very specific but clear question as well. So, with regard to the governance of stable and consistent unique identifiers, the development of this global UUID concept and the implementation of this concept within the World Geographical Names database can only be a first, but a crucial step towards consistency. But these UUIDs established on a global level have to be either nationally used or they have to be mapped with the nationally used UUIDs. Luis presented an example where nationally UUIDs already exist, and so the global ones would have to be mapped in order to unfold the full power of linked data and then integrating geospatial and statistical data fully. And this linkage might take years. I'm quite sure about that. But the foundation stone has been laid with this concept of the Angegen for the global level. And now the first implementation has to be started. And let's see where this will lead to. Thanks.
Thank you, Pier Giorgio. Robert?
Thank you so much, Rolando. I think for my questions specifically on the components or the practical steps we can take, of course, the first acknowledgement here is to know that, for example, we're already 10 years into the implementation of SDGs. And if there's anything that we've created is very much that demand for applying all these SDG methodologies or SDG-related methodologies at the local level. And of course, the implication, as I noted earlier, is very much that we need to begin transferring a lot of all this global knowledge and systems and platforms in ways that can be utilized at that local level. As we heard also from Luis, for example, from our analysis as UN Habitat, we see that there are over 10,000 cities. So you can imagine if these were countries and they have their own national statistical systems, you're dealing with 10,000 plus institutions that you need to build capacity for. So I do believe practically, one, we need to work towards enhancing those local capacities to make sure that they're very strong to understand and utilize all these systems, both on the geospatial side, but also on the statistical side, be able to apply all our methodologies in a way that is very much standardized, and of course that allows them to ensure interoperability, but also understanding the local and national and global connections at the same time. I do feel also we need to invest very much into the capacities of ensuring that these databases that we do have are accessible, but also are being utilized at that local level. If we make them more open in terms of their access, it becomes much more useful and more usable at that local level. I also feel that the multi-level layer that we are dealing with, particularly for cities and local governments, sometimes that is in conflict but we need to find a way to nurture it in the spirit of data and system strengthening so that the local is working very well seamlessly at the national level and also the global level. And that sort of partnership, if it's well strengthened or collaboration, it should be able to facilitate very much bringing even all the other stakeholders, be it civil society or academia and citizens in general, all to play a role at that level. I think what is essential is that some knowledge hubs are already emerging. The Medellin Knowledge Hub is a good example that is coming through from a city that has been applying all these technologies very seamlessly and of course already investing into the elements of AI. So we need some classical cities or hubs that can demonstrate to other cities and partners how this can all work, both in terms of multilateral layers of functioning, but at the same time also using some case studies, might be on urban mobility, it might be in climate resilience, but at least demonstration centers that other cities and local government can learn from would definitely be very helpful. And I think the last but not least, we've had a few cities that have gone through some sort of channeling of that, using the evidence, packaging it into knowledge, and pushing it very much into the actions and policies. And of course, many of these have only been successful because they were supported very much at the national and as well as from the international partners. So again, that becomes another practical aspect that we need to invest in moving forward. Over to you.
Thank you, Robert. And I don't know if someone of the panelists wants to make a quick response about the question that our colleague in the chat asked.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in quickly, knowing that time is of the essence. I really want to highlight that using these population grids has allowed us to change where we invest in public transport, where we invest in additional roads, where we invest to prevent flooding happening again. It allows us to understand the impact of natural disasters, so we know how many people have been affected by a flood, by a mudslide. So we use it for a wide range of policies. And one last thing I'd highlight, we also focus a lot on accessibility. How quickly can you get to the nearest hospital? Can you walk to the nearest schools? All things that would have been impossible without that detailed population grid. So I really think this is a new source of data that can allow us to answer all the questions in a much better way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lewis. Over to you, Olive, just to close the session. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. And sorry we're running out of time, but we could have carried on this conversation for quite longer. So I just wanted to say thank you to all the participants, but also all the speakers and convenerings. I just wanted to wrap up quickly about, why did we ask all of you to come and speak to us today on the webinar? It's all because, we're trying to address the challenges and share good practice and ideas. We all have the same challenges. We know that SDG reporting is disparate, whether it's, we've got data gaps, as we said today, whether it's coverage, whether it is about the timeliness of it, and it's inconsistent across the globe. So it's about kind of finding ways to address this challenge. And as Josh said, we've got staffing and resourcing challenges that we need to push for automation, and all these needs may be new ways of thinking. So today we've heard about data integration and data conflation. We heard about satellite imagery to check changes and automated the change of address registers. We've heard about the grids and making things more uniform across the world and bring multivariate or multivariables to compare things together in a more consistent way, and look at degree of urbanization, transport needs, etc. And finally, we've used that unique ideas to reference, those maybe geographic features that don't exist yet. So like the cities that Pier Giorgio mentioned. So really, this webinar was about disaggregation and what for, to provide consistency across the globe for data when possible, to leverage those open and wide sources of information that are becoming more and more available, to become more adaptive in the change and forecasting change, and to increase the speed of data integration and, making things machine readable, using the right tools, machine learning, all this to keep it simple, like Lewis said, but actually making the right activities and interventions to allow for this simple but essential activities. So thanks all for your contribution. Thanks for people that stayed longer. We're only at 79, so I'll leave you to it 5 minutes behind, but this has been a fantastic day. Thank you very much.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye-bye.